Over Thanksgiving weekend, last weekend, I spent a lot of time on highways, most of them interstates, 1,300 miles or so on interstate highways. I-72 to 74 to 70 to Central Ohio, then on to 77 South to southeastern Ohio on the West Virginia border, then back up I-75 to my hometown in Michigan, then across Michigan on I-94, northwest Indiana on I-80, and finally home I-57 down to Decatur. Interstate highways. On the one hand, I really like the interstates, and I like the fact that the speed limits are now pretty much 70. Out west, they're 75. It's even better. I'm a fairly impatient person by nature. I'm on the go, active, in motion a lot. And interstate highways allow us to get where we're going fastest. But admit it, they're also mind-numbingly monotonous, boring. And the only thing that breaks up the boredom is the occasional truck stop invitation. Something to do on the long journey. But for about 30 minutes or so last Friday morning on our way from southeastern Ohio to Michigan, we got off the interstate highway and traveled on an old state highway in Ohio, Route 821 to be exact. We were in search of the cemetery where my grandparents are buried. Now, the terrain in southeastern Ohio is hilly. The hills are not tall, but they're really jagged, sharp, up and down quickly, which means that there's lots of blind corners and sharp curves. There's even an occasional one-lane bridge or two. Careful on those. The path that we went meandered along the route of the Muskingum River and then shot due north, Route 821, through literal one-horse towns with names like Whipple and Lower Salem, which the locals pronounce almost with one syllable, Lower Salem. We eventually found the cemetery, but I remember as a child, I loved it when my mom would drive us home from Grandma Brum's house in Marietta along those old state highways to Zanesville, where Greg Foltz is from, where we absolutely had to get on the interstate. And for 30 minutes or so last Friday, I was back in my childhood days. One of the children from the back of the van even said, "Hey, Dad, I wish the whole ride to Michigan were this way." I said, "Yeah, me too." Of course, it'd be 10 hours instead of the planned 6-hour drive that we had. But that's what those old state highways do. They force us to slow down. You have to pay attention. You have to notice and observe where things are going. You can't be in a hurry. You have to be patient because that old state highway won't allow you to arrive any faster than it's designed to do. Today we begin the season of Advent, and that word means arrive. It means to arrive, arrival. We anticipate during these 4 weeks before Christmas, and we prepare for the arrival of Jesus to us as a baby born in Bethlehem. And we can't tell the Christmas story that we'll be telling over the next few weeks. We cannot tell it. It is impossible to tell it without thinking of journeys on highways and how wonderful it was to hear this beautiful song from the choir about the holy highway that God creates. But think about it. Mary and Joseph traveled on the back of a donkey on a dirt highway from Nazareth to Bethlehem to give birth to Jesus there. The Magi from the east came on some kind of long-distance highway to bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the baby. Even the shepherds traveled on foot over some hillside highway with their sheep to be the first witnesses of Jesus' birth. Highways are part of the Christmas story. But centuries before all of those journeys on highways took place, the people of God took another journey on another highway, and it's impossible to prepare fully for Christ's coming at Christmas without remembering that journey on that highway. The year was 586 before the time of Jesus, almost 600 years before Christ, and the people of God were living in a territory called Judea, Jerusalem was the capital of Judea, and the temple, the holy house of God, was located in Jerusalem. But in that year, 586, the Babylonians, another territory, invaded Judea, and they conquered the city. They destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They burned the holy house of God to the ground, and they took many of the people as hostages of sorts. They took them into captivity with them back to Babylon to live in captivity for 50 years as their servants. And while the people of God were held captive in Babylon against their will, they went through a whole lot of emotions. They had a lot of time to think and ponder and process their feelings. Some of them felt that God was punishing them for their disobedience and the mistakes they made, and they felt guilt and regrets and remorse. Others felt simple grief, deep and abiding grief, because their homeland meant everything to them, and to be separated from their homeland was unbearable. And others felt doubt about God, doubt about themselves. Why would God, if God were so powerful, allow God's holy house to be destroyed? Maybe God isn't that powerful, and maybe we shouldn't be investing our faith in this God. Self-doubt. Well, as God is wont to do, when the people were at their lowest, God sent the strongest word of hope possible. Those are the words that we heard today, Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 5. I believe that they're some of the first words sung about in Handel's The Messiah. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. God said through the prophet Isaiah to the people, hang in there, be comforted, be encouraged, don't give up. I have not forgotten you. I know where you are, and I'm going to set you free. I'm going to liberate you from this captivity, and I'm going to prepare for you a highway through the desert, a holy highway that will lead you back to your home. And sure enough, it all happened just as Isaiah prophesied. 57 to be exact, 57 years after they were taken in captivity, in another territory called Persia, the great leader Cyrus arose, and Cyrus and the Persians invaded Babylon, and they defeated the Babylonians, and they set the people of God free, and they journeyed on that highway through the desert back to their home. It's important to remember that journey, because during Advent, today through Christmas, we also make a journey. Ours is not a physical journey, it's a spiritual journey. But it's very much like that journey out of Babylon 2,500 years ago. Because just as the people were held in captivity in Babylon, so are we today, held captive by our sins and our shortcomings. But just as God sent deliverance to the people and set them free by God's grace to their rightful home, so too does Jesus Christ come at Christmas to liberate us and set us free from our spiritual bondage and sin, and provide a pathway, a holy highway for us to reach our eternal and heavenly home. The journey that you and I make through Advent as we approach Christmas is not a journey on an interstate highway. It's not the kind of journey where you rev up the accelerator, 5 to whatever, however fast you go above the speed limit, up to that point, hit the cruise control, and sit back and zone out. No, it's a journey like those ones on the old state highways. It's a slow journey. Culture says, don't wait. Line up on Black Friday. Get to Christmas as fast as you can. But Advent says, wait. Slow down. Pay attention. Look around you. Look within you. Advent is an opportunity to see ourselves inwardly for who we really are, for all of our giftedness and all of our shortcomings. Because the Christ who comes at Christmas comes to celebrate our giftedness and to greet our shortcomings and our sins with forgiveness and grace. So Advent is an active time. It's a time to actively examine ourselves and to even look around at where we are, what's in us, what's around us, and to identify those things that might be obstacles to Christ coming to connect with us. So as we close our meditation today, as we move on to communion and end our worship today, the hanging of the greens, I want to reference something that Tina is doing in her Monday night book study called Travel the Highways of Advent. She's meeting with a small group And you're invited to come tomorrow at 5:30 in the cafe. And she's asking people to spiritually prepare their hearts for Christ's coming. And she's giving them a question to think about each week. And I think it's the question from last week is a good one for us to think about today. And it's this: when you think about your life and you examine your life, what's inside of you, what's going on around you, what is there that might be an obstacle, a hindrance to Christ's coming? And the challenge for this week is to pray for the grace and the strength to lift that up to God, to say, God, take this burden from me, whatever it is. Maybe it's an obsession with busyness, or maybe it's an obsession with trying to meet the expectations of others, or maybe it's forgiveness that God is asking you to grant someone. Maybe it's letting go of anger that you're holding on to, or resentment over a past mistake that someone in your life has created. Whatever it is, ask for the strength and the grace to lift that up so you and all of us, we can greet Christ with more open arms and open hearts. Each week during Advent, we're also going to sing a verse of O Come, Emmanuel. Today, we sung the whole song because O Come, Emmanuel really highlights the themes that we're going to emphasize during Advent this year. Today, we sang the whole song, but remember verse 1. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. We sing that song, especially today, in honor of those people of God 2,500 years ago who were held captive in Babylon, but whom God set free through God's grace and mercy. And we sing that in honor of us who are held captive by our own sin and shortcomings, but whom Christ, our Emmanuel, comes to set free by his grace and mercy and forgiveness.